So I have a few items to go over before we start the presentation. So please know that this meeting is being recorded. That way it can be posted to the project webpage. We should have it posted within about a week. And that way, if you'd like to view it or if you'd like to share it with any of your neighbors who weren't able to attend, and we will post the link in the chat to that project webpage, or you can also access it via the QR code on the screen or the web link. So during the presentation, we ask you to keep your video off and your microphone muted. During the discussion session, we encourage you to turn your video on if you feel comfortable doing so. Next slide, please. We hope everyone will feel comfortable sharing their questions and comments, either verbally or in the chat. So please be respectful of others and mindful of everyone's time. You're also welcome to reach out to me directly via email if you'd like to provide comments that way or discuss the project further. My email is here on this slide, and we'll also put that in the chat. Next slide, please. So in a moment, our design team will give a short presentation followed by a listening and discussion session. If a question or comment comes to mind during the presentation, feel free to add it to the chat and we'll address it after the presentation. If you would like to speak during the discussion session and you're joining via Zoom on a computer, use the raise hand button and we will unmute you. If anyone is calling in on a phone, use *9 to raise your hand. And once we call on you, use *6 to unmute and mute again. Next slide, please. So this is our agenda for the evening. We'll start with an introduction of the project team and then go over the project status and scope of work. Our design team will then go through a presentation summarizing the history of the site and analysis of the existing conditions, as well as recommendations for safety improvements. And then this will be followed by a listening and discussion session, and then closing remarks and next steps. And next slide, please. So once again, I'm Amy Linne, project manager from Boston Parks. Also joining us is Lauren Bryant from Boston Parks, project manager for the Franklin Park Action Plan and other Franklin Park projects, and she has a lot of knowledge about everything that's going on there. Quanah Wise, Director of Community Engagement for the Environment, Energy, and Open Space Cabinet at the city, is also joining us. Moderating for us tonight is Ben Tillman, also from the EEOS Cabinet. And then from the Office of Neighborhood Services, we have representation from several neighborhoods. I think some of them are joining us on this call, but they're also a great resource if you have any community concerns. And then Kyle Zick, Landscape Architecture, is the design consultant on this project. And joining us tonight, we have Kyle Zick and Mike Doucette. And then I do want to welcome any elected officials and staff who may be on this call. And if you'd like to raise your hand to say something at this time, we'd love to hear from you. Great, Angie.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi.
Thanks.
I think my computer might be going a little bit slow. Hi, everyone. I'm Angie. I'm representing Councilor Anderson from the District 7 office. I'm so happy to connect with you all. If anyone has any questions related to D7 or wants follow-up on this project or any other projects, please feel free to reach out to me. I've left my email in the chat, but if you're just joining, I will put it in the chat again so you have access. And I'm available. So you can feel free to contact me in the chat anytime and I will reach out to you. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you, Angie. We appreciate you being here. Okay. Let's go ahead. Next slide. So this is a list of folks that we have either already been coordinating with or will be doing so. This includes Franklin Park Coalition and the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. Boston Landmarks Commission will be reviewing any work that we're doing on the site. We have community members such as yourselves on this call tonight. PowerCorps, which is the city's green jobs training program, and they've been working with the Emerald Necklace Conservancy on clearing invasive vegetation and clearing trash around the bear dens. And then the Boston Parks Department arborists have been involved, and also the Office of Neighborhood Services. Next slide, please. So this is the first meeting for the Bear Dens Safety Improvement Project. We will take feedback from tonight's meeting and move forward with recommendations for improvements to the site. And then those will be presented at a second meeting, which we're planning to schedule for sometime in February. We'll certainly let you know when that date has been nailed down. And then the design team will develop construction documents through the early spring, and construction is anticipated to start this summer. We are in the process of transferring the property from the state's care and custody over to the city, so this construction start is contingent on that going through. Next slide, please. So Lauren is now going to go over some updates on work that has happened since the Franklin Park Action Plan. So I'll turn it over to Lauren. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. And it's nice to see so many community members that I know from the action plan on here. Wanted to just give everybody a little bit of an update about what the Parks Department has been working on since the action plan. Everybody that was involved in that process knows that there were a lot of recommendations, and obviously we can't do it all at one time, but we've been working on multiple different items. And if you recall from the action plan, there are several different ways work is going to be progressing. Some of them are capital projects, some are happening through the Franklin Park Trust, and others are happening in-house as part of our maintenance projects. So we just wanted to give you a bit of an update. There are capital projects that are happening, like the Bear Dens right now, the Make Safe project that Amy's working on. We also are hoping to release some more information in the coming weeks on the Overlook and some work that's going to be happening there. And we also are working on putting the capital budget together for several other capital projects that we're hoping to add over the next year or so. And then as this project goes on, hopefully Amy will be able to give you some updates about those things that we're hoping to release in the coming weeks. In addition, we have the Franklin Park Trust. And for those of you who may not know what that is, there was $5 million of the Franklin Park Action Plan money that went into a trust. And the money that comes off of that in interest every year, we're able to use for two different things. One is enhanced maintenance in the park, and two is for programming. And that 70% for maintenance and 30% for programming. So the Franklin Park Coalition has been doing some really great programming with the funding that they've gotten that they'll continue to do. Things like music and arts in the park, dancing, nature walks, a lot of really great things. And in terms of the maintenance, we've had 2 years with the trust for maintenance. And this is just a recap of some of the things that we did. So the first year, we worked on a lot of invasive vegetation removal at the Overlook, debris removal at Blue Hill Ave and Refectory, cobble gutter cleaning, drain cleaning. And like I was saying, this is enhanced, so it's above and beyond what our standard crews would be doing. So we're not taking anything away from them. It's the fact that we're getting to do more. We did design work for Glen Road pathway repaving and Overlook stairs resetting and repointing. And then, like I said, some of the great stuff that Franklin Park Coalition has done. And then the second year of funding for the trust, we're going to be actually doing the repaving of Glen Road work and the Overlook stair repair and renovation, looking at continued invasive vegetation treatment, because we know that's not a one-year thing, right? We need to continue to go back at that to get rid of that vegetation, cleaning more of the cobble gutters, and then also rehabilitating some of the picnic area in the wilderness. And in addition to that, like Amy said, PowerCorps has been out doing some really great vegetation removal as well. Our arborists, we've gotten a few more staff members on our tree crews. And so we've been able to do some increased maintenance in our trees in Franklin Park. The other thing that we're continuing to do is to work on adding operational staff members, which is something that came out of the Franklin Park Trust, or sorry, came out of the Franklin Park Action Plan. And we're continuing to work on that. And again, hoping to make some announcements over the next few weeks that Amy can keep you posted on. The other thing that we have done is we've brought over the Franklin Park Action Plan website to the City of Boston, and I'll put that link in the website for anyone who wants to view that action plan. And we're also working, Amy and I are together on creating a Franklin Park kind of landing page where all of these different projects are going to be linked to, so that people can keep up with all of these different projects that are going to be happening in Franklin Park. So with that, I'm going to stop talking, but if you have any questions about those things, feel free to email me and I'll put my email in the chat, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kyle.
All right, well, thanks so much. I'm Kyle Zick. I'm a landscape architect with Kyle Zick Landscape Architecture, and we're the prime consultant for this Bear Dens project. Now, the project is fairly specialized because of the historic nature, but also the uniqueness. So it's not just us landscape architects working on this. We have my office, myself, and Mike Doucette, but then we also have other consultants who are preservation minded. We have a structural engineer from Silman, and we also have a historic preservation consultant, Building Conservation Associates. So they'll help us with things like the stability of the stone walls, the fencing, and also how to restore those things appropriately. And then because this is a unique site, we had a surveyor, of course, Niche Engineering, who did the survey for all of Franklin Park. But then we had ScanSure do 3D scanning of the walls and the fencing so that we had really accurate base plans to be able to develop the design drawings that we are developing. So then what are the goals for this meeting? We want to make sure everyone clearly understands the scope of the project. We can present some of the existing conditions findings and talk about the potential safety improvements. And that's basically, and that defines a lot of what this project is about. It's about safety. So we're going to prioritize resolving any of the safety issues, and we'll clearly explain what we see those as part of this presentation tonight, and also stabilization of historic features. So I'll start with this site plan to orient you. We'll use this plan multiple times, and then we also have a three-dimensional version that we'll use. But just for orientation, what you see in this, surrounded by this dashed line, is the limits of the Bear Dens project. Seaver is over here to the side of the image, and then there's a pathway here that gets you to the stairs to the plaza that connects you to all the Bear Dens themselves. Now, tonight, we're going to use some of the original references to the cage numbers to help explain where we are in the Bear Dens and what things we're referring to. So cage 1 is, so if you're coming up the stairs, you're presented with what looks like 2 cages. One to the left we'll refer to as cage 1. And then the one that would be in front of you as you come up the stairs was 2 cages, cage 2 and 3. And then if you went back down the stairs, cage 4, which was the polar bears, is further down the path. Other things just in terms of symbols on this plan, these green circles are trees, existing trees. These gray circles are the pools that were part of each one of the bear exhibits. And the gray thick lines are the walls or the fencing. And then the squares are the overnight enclosures for each one of the Bear Dens. So then we think about this in 3 dimensions, which is helpful because of the walls and the fencing and that kind of thing. All the same, but I just want to orient you. Here's the stairs, the plaza, and then we have the 4 cages, and you're seeing the walls and the fencing and then the pools. All right, so I'll step back a second and talk about the history. And I think this was an interesting plan from 1925, which was for the zoo expansion. The Bear Dens already existed in 1925, but I like this plan because here are the Bear Dens, and it shows the bigger thinking about the zoo. Now, the zoo today is here, but at the time, the zoo was not in the same location and was, was going to be a larger idea. I'll zoom in to the area where the Bear Dens are. So these existed in 1925 when this plan was drawn. Here are the stairs, that plaza, and the 4 cages. The expansion was considering more exhibits beyond the Bear Dens. So then I'll step back 1912, which is when the zoo opened and these bear dens. So it's all very similar in terms of the graphics that I'm talking about. And here are the cage references, cage 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're using those same. And the stairs, this plaza had a number of trees in it, and trees between the plaza and the cages. And as I mentioned, there were pools in each cage, logs, and the fencing. We're fortunate to have more detailed drawings from the original design. These are cross sections showing the construction of the granite walls and how they wanted refined, more smooth face of the wall on the inside of the enclosures, and then more rough to grow vines on the outside. And that there was these metal posts and a metal cap on the fencing. And that was a safety feature to keep bears in and keep people, keep bears in and people out, or the reverse, depending on your perspective. And we're very fortunate to have historic photographs and postcards, which really bring this to life and allow you to visualize more than the ruins you see today. So this happens to be, this is cage 1, showing 2 bears on land, the pool itself, the openings to go into the overnight enclosure, the fencing with its cap, and then people standing behind a fence that keeps them back from the cage itself. If we go to cage 2, which is the one that is iconic because of the relief, you see, it's very familiar in terms of the components because things have lasted very well. The stone wall, concrete pavement, the stone, the pool itself, and the cap with those metal spikes. Some of the information even explains the bears' names. These are brown bears, Minka and her cubs, Rose and Grace probably. And then we had great photos of people observing the bears, and then in cage 4, the polar bears. And we know that what species of bears were in each cage. So cage 1, the brown bears, Russian brown bears in cage 2, black bears in 3, and polar bears in 4. Now, aside from the historic information, Lauren's already mentioned the Franklin Park Action Plan. This is a page that mentions some of the thoughts on the bear dens. This is certainly something we're considering, but also remember our project is about safety. So we consider what the recommendations were in the action plan, and we want to make sure that any of the improvements we make from a safety perspective don't preclude or limit any of the future program proposals. So while we won't get to the point where there's this new use, we just want to make sure we don't prevent anything. So back to a plan view, and we'll start to talk specifics about some of the things we've observed. And I'll go through some of the primary categories or topics. So same organization, we have cage 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the stairs are here with the plaza. So what do the different colors mean? These colored circles generally are holes in the pavement. There used to be trees here. Now it's like a pothole and a tripping hazard. We also have holes in and cracks on the stairs. And there are a few locations on the stairs where there were trees as well that there's a tripping hazard. That fence that I mentioned was in one of those postcard views. It was cut, it was removed, and the fence posts are all still there. You can see they were cut, but they're actually tripping hazards along the edges of a lot of the exhibit areas. And then there are holes in some of the concrete pavement in the cages themselves that have large voids that you could fall, to your knee. And then the pools themselves, they vary from 1.5 feet to, I think, maybe 8 feet in the polar bear pool. And that's a concern. And then there are hazardous trees, these yellow circles that will be reviewed by the arborist and done and removed as part of pre-construction work. So then we have photos that explain some of these, allow you to understand some of the topics more. So in terms of some of the general issues, we have a fall hazard with each one of these old pools. They're full of debris, but there is, potential for someone to fall into these. I mentioned the concrete pavement has holes and there's large voids that are a concern. The metal cap that's on top of the fencing that was originally the cage enclosures is badly rusted, and not all of it is stable and could fall. And there are a number of other places where there are holes, probably old utility structures. This might have been part of one of the cage, the exhibits. And then the curb that separated cage 2 and 3 is a tripping hazard as well. So we don't have any, any lack of issues out here. But then we have some stabilization issues as well. If we go to cage 4, which is the polar bear cage, you can see a large crack in the wall here, and the stones are actually dislodged. So there's two things going on. One, this portion of the wall is resting on ledge, and this part of the wall is resting on land. So there's a differential settlement going on there. The other thing that's happening is that this is where the concrete cap meets the metal cap. And this upper right image is zooming in on that. And there's a gap here where water gets in and gets into that crack and then freezes and thaws and makes this worse. In each one of the cages too, there are these metal spikes that in the original drawings they referred to as bayonets. They're embedded in concrete, and the concrete in some of the cages is really spalling and deteriorating. So we want to be able to stabilize that so this doesn't come apart. So then I'll go through it cage by cage. While there are some issues that are common to all of them, there are some unique ones as well. So I'll start with just some of the issues, and then we'll talk about recommendations as we go through it cage by cage. So just as a reminder, there's a locus plan in the bottom right here. Cage 1 is, if you were to come up the stairs, the one that's to the left. And here's an image of it, you would recognize it. So there are a few different things that we're concerned about specific to this cage. You can see that most of the fence panels are intact, but there's one removed here, there's a partial over here, and over in this other corner. One concern is an impression of safety, or the fact that you could get trapped if you were to walk in here and someone were to block this opening, you'd feel like you couldn't get out. So that's something we want to talk about and see if that is a concern, because we could potentially remove some panels to open it up more, but still have enough here to give the impression of the historic cage. No different than in any of the 4 cages, there's a pool that has the fall hazard. There are issues with the pavement and the fence stability and the fence cap stability. And this will be common to each one of the cages as well, graffiti and covering up graffiti. It's not a safety issue, but it's something that is an issue from the historic character, but also it has some concerns in terms of the stability of the mortar and the stone. So I mentioned the ability to get in and out of this cage. And if there was a concern about that, and if I go back, here's one opening, you could remove this panel and these 2 panels just to provide a larger opening and more freely come in and out of this space. So that's something we'll want to hear your thoughts on. And then the other cage 1 specific issues, some of these are really kind of zooming into very specific things, but there are a lot of cracks in the pavement within the cage itself, and they would be cleaned out, and we would patch these so there's no tripping hazard. The pools, we have a couple options there. Common to both options, we would remove the leaves, debris, and trash so that as water gets in here, they can drain. And we don't want to leave this because moisture in the concrete aren't necessarily a good thing. We could fill this with gravel so there's no tripping hazard or fall hazard. And that gravel could be removed in the future if there was some other thought on how this pool should be used. Or we could install a wood deck across here so that was, in either case, either option would be walkable, but it would just be a little bit different in terms of the firmness or the stability of that surface. But regardless, we would get rid of the fall hazard. There are also some bent pickets. Were you concerned about someone getting stuck in the larger opening? And then there's a curb outside of the cage where rebar is sticking out of it. So we would want to cut the rebar and stabilize the curb so it didn't deteriorate anymore. So then we get to cage 2. There's some common issues that I've already talked about: graffiti, the stability of the fencing system, and some of the holes in the pavement. Unique to cage 2 and 4 are these protection cylinders that were around live trees that kept the bears away from the trees. The trees are gone, but these cages remain. And there's actually a hole in this one that you could get inside of it. So that's something we would close up and make this more stable. There's also a divider between what was cage 2 and cage 3. What's the remnant of it, the concrete, is actually fairly loose and is a tripping hazard. And there's other things like these old utility vaults that are a fall hazard, and some of the remnant fence posts that are in this curb are tripping hazards. So then some of these same issues, but with the recommendations, the pool are the same recommendations: either remove the debris, fill with gravel, or put a wood platform over this. The cage around the tree, we can close the opening and make it stable. This divider between cage 2 and 3, we can remove the tripping hazard and fill in the holes in the pavement and any of these other utility holes. Cage 3, which is adjacent to cage 2, is different in that the fencing is intact. There is one fence panel that's not stable that we would definitely have to remove, but we'd be looking at the stability of the remnant of the fence cap for sure. There's graffiti in this cage as well. There are the same tripping hazards and holes in the pavement. There is also a portion of some of the stones in the retaining wall that are leaning that we'll look at. So as I mentioned, one of these fence panels we would have to remove, but we've looked at every fence panel. There are some of the connections of the panel to the posts that we need to reinforce, but we have an inventory of all that. Now, behind cage 3 on the Seaver Street side, there is a catch basin or a utility structure that has no cover on it, and you could actually fall 4 feet or more into this. There's yellow survey ribbon, pink ribbon around it. So that's something we'd either fill in or add a cover to. And then I've already.
Can I interject on that one?
Yeah.
Because we did send out our maintenance crew to at least provide an immediate solution to that. So there's not a hole that's so dangerous, currently. But
great, thanks for adding that.
Yeah.
And then same things in terms of how to address the pool. This one actually is almost completely full of leaves, but the same depth as the one in cage 2. And all the other issues are fairly common to cage 2 and 3. Cage 4 is a little different, and it's different not because it had polar bears in it, but it's long and linear, and the interior of the cage is very steep. So with that come other issues. The other thing that's unique is that the metal cap on top of the fence is intact. That doesn't mean it's stable, but it's intact. And there are pieces of it that have fallen. And because of some of these unique elements, there are different approaches to this cage. And the other thing I should point out is the fencing is intact. There is one opening here, so the public can get inside here. The pavement is pretty slippery. There are big holes in the pavement, and the drop in the pool is much greater. It's like 1.5 feet on one end, but maybe 6 feet or more on the other. And there's one of those cages around what used to be a tree as well. So we would address the instability in that cage. We would need to fill the pool one way or another. Could be gravel or the wood deck that I mentioned. The steep grade is a concern. So some of the things, because of some of the greater concerns and unique concerns in cage 4, the deepness of this pool, the steepness and the slippery nature of a solution here may be to restore this fence panel and not have public access within the cage itself. But that's something we'd like to hear more about from you all in terms of your feedback. The structural engineer also looked at this concrete pavement, and it's a structural slab. It has reinforcing in it. It has a number of holes. It feels hollow. So we have concerns about this long-term stability of that as well. And what I had mentioned earlier was, with that metal cap being intact, we've looked at it very carefully, and one or two things could happen. We could remove the metal cap so there was no danger of it falling, or it could be restored and made stable. And that decision largely will be made depending on cost, because there's a finite budget for this project, and all these different needs that we've mentioned will have a price tag attached to them. And this red highlighted panel here and on the end, we would fill in with a matching fence panels to limit the access to the space. So everything I mentioned so far is about cage 1, 2, 3, and 4. So outside the cages, there are other issues as well. And this is where you may say, Kyle, enough, we don't want to hear anymore. But these are all issues that are a concern for the public accessing the site. So we're going to talk about the plaza and the stairs, and there are a number of issues there. And I'll go at these kind of starting at the locus plan and going through the different photos. So there are still some of those fence posts that are tripping hazard, where there used to be tree pits. Those could be filled in to prevent a tripping hazard. Some of the stone walls that form the backs of the benches have fallen apart, and they could be rebuilt. So there's no concern there, and to stabilize the structure. We can patch the holes in the stairs, and where there used to be trees within the stairs, we can make that so it's not a tripping hazard. There's also issues with vegetation. So there's some older hazardous trees, but there's also invasive species. Some that are growing inside some of the cages, some immediately adjacent to some of the walls that we'd be concerned about long-term damage to the walls. Most of the vines have been removed by the Power Corps and the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, but some still remain. And then I mentioned those older hazardous trees. Here are photos of 5 of them that will be removed as part of the pre-construction activities. These numbers refer to, they're an identification number for each tree that helps us. That was assigned as part of the tree inventory. And there's a brass tag on every one of these that has that same number on it. And the only other thing to talk about is there are some ledge outcroppings, though all the cages are kind of built in and around the outcroppings. Originally, you can still see some of the fence posts that had cable or chain to limit access to some of the drops off of the ledge. So that's something for us to also consider, because they can be, the ledge is slippery, and if you were to fall, you would definitely, there's a concern there. So thank you all for listening. I'm happy now to stop and pause and get feedback and comments from you all.
Thanks, Kyle. And I wanted to add one thing. So I see we're getting some great kind of ideas going in the chat, and I think to provide a little bit of clarity, maybe on some short-term programming ideas versus potentially, longer term, more significant, like infrastructure improvements. At this point, because we're working with, a somewhat modest budget of the construction budget of $720,000, we're really focusing on those safety improvements, I think, as Kyle said. And in terms of what that might mean for programming, there's certainly things that could then happen in the space, but essentially working with a safer version of what's there now. But we'd certainly, want people in the longer term to kind of think about the bigger ideas and the things that came up in the action plan, but that's still probably several years away, because there are these other priority projects at Franklin Park. So those are sort of the 2 timelines for thinking about it. And I think in this process, we're really sort of focused on those shorter term programmatic ideas, but also the different recommendations for safety improvements, such as, what happens in those pools. Kyle mentioned a couple options. So yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Okay. Looks like you're unmuted.
Good evening, and thank you. Thanks, Sarah, for sending me the information, because Garrison tried it, didn't get this notice. But I'd really like to know what is the major reason we're making these moderate changes, given that it's been 50 years and that, the hole in front on the Cedar Street side and the bear cages and the other, pools there have been in existence for 50 years. And to a large extent, there's been a lot of misuse, a lot of use going through there. What are we trying to achieve in this short period of time in terms of the limited funds that are available? And why the proposal that was put out 20 years ago to turn the space into workable entertainment space, one with a small restaurant and a small cafe type space for parents and people who come through, especially doing cross-country races, why that wasn't being considered.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think the reason for these more short-term safety improvements are really just to, eliminate the hazards that are out there. But the reason for sort of deferring the bigger improvements and moves are really kind of considering the other projects happening at the park. So understanding that, White Stadium, that project is certainly going to have a big impact on the park overall, the overlook. So some of those things that are ongoing now, we'd like to sort of let that context of the bear dens evolve before there's kind of final decisions made on what happens in the bear den space. So that's part of the reason, I think. But certainly trying to get rid of those really, problematic safety issues as quickly as possible in the short term. So does that answer the question?
Not really, because it doesn't say what makes it. It doesn't say what makes it. It doesn't say what makes it problematic all of a sudden. It's really been 50 years. And so there are some changes that should take place. A lot of the antiquities that surround the bear dens, the gates and things were taken by movie crews and by others who had access to drive up into that area. But it is a natural passage for people coming in from Humboldt walking towards Walnut. And so all of these things that you want to do now, I guess in the sense of safety makes sense, but in the terms of practical application and use, does this come with a maintenance plan and does this come with an overall safety plan? So there's a consistency beyond just spending money that makes the space more usable. Crouch Woods has a very historic role in Franklin Park, and the bear dens have a very historic role. And if we're talking about securing so that people can better utilize, that we can have programming and activities, we're bringing the lights back and the water back, that would make sense. If we're just like fixing things up, then what's the value?
Louis, if I could jump in on that to help answer that question. I know that you joined late, but one of the things Amy did mention earlier in the presentation too, if you wanted to go back and watch it, it'll be on the website, is that the part of the reason that we're doing this now and is because Boston Parks doesn't currently have care and custody of this space. So what we're working on, and it's part of what we talked about during the action plan too, is there are several parcels within Franklin Park, bear dens being one of them, Peabody Circle being one, that currently are not in care and custody of the city of Boston. So we can't do the improvements that we're talking about right now until that's transferred over. So we're in the process of that. There have been some administration changes in the state on their end. And so we're continuing to work on that, and we're hoping that that'll come soon. But that's one of the reasons that we haven't been able to do it up until now, because it's not our property. It's not something that we could do those things on. So what we're doing is, knowing that that's in the works, we're getting this Make Safe plan going so that as soon as that is transferred to us, we can make these safety improvements. And then what our hope is, sort of like we're kind of talking about at the Overlook as well, if we can make it safe and make it be a place that people can come and use, that maybe there'll be some events that the Franklin Park Coalition can put on there. Maybe Boston Parks can program some things. And so then as we start to see how that space is actually able to be used, that'll help us in that phase 2 of planning a bigger design for it. But that's part of why, Louis, I agree with you. It's been one of the things since I started working in Franklin Park that I've been saying, why can't we fix bear dens? It's absolutely, I completely agree, but that's why, because it's not ours. And hopefully that'll change soon.
Lauren, thank you very much. But
Absolutely.
you have to remember that as the founding member, one of the 9 founding members of the Franklin Park Coalition and the Boston Zoological Society, not a founding member, but part of it for 8 years, I'm very much aware of the care and custody. I'm also aware that the city of Boston does leave blowing and some cleaning around the bear dens and Crouch Woods at times, but nothing comprehensive. And that's where the challenge is, you know, we're talking about piecemeal activities, then that's not a benefit for the residents in the community who utilize the space. If we're trying to put something together so when your negotiations conclude, I'm hopeful that the negotiations and the program that you're coming up with is comprehensive, not in the sense of new designs and all new activities. Maybe the restaurant idea and the cafe idea might be too much, but whatever's going on at White Stadium has very little to do with the impact of Crouch Woods and what goes on around the bear dens. And for us, if we're going to talk about what the benefit is of closing cracks and fixing things of that nature, I'd be hopeful that we're talking about possibly lighting, safety things that would benefit not just the cross-country runners, but the people who utilize that space as, you know, as a respite, because it does get utilized by the community. And there are some benefits that are and amenities that are still there because of, you know, what it offers aesthetically. So, you know, if we're going to just talk, it can't be Band-Aid. It has to be something that says whatever relationship we develop with the state in terms of transferring the property back under the city control, then it should have some comprehensive nature, including, you know, the cleanup of the front apron that faces Seaver Street, the removal of all the dead trees and stuff that the city cuts and leaves on the road and things of that nature. Those things should be a part of the discussion in a comprehensive way that doesn't take up all your budget, of course.
Right. Thanks, Louis. And I agree that all of those things are things that, you know, you guys know, and we talked about in the action plan. We can't do everything in Franklin Park with the money from the action plan, kind of like we can't do everything around bear dens for this money that we have for the Make Safe. So I think that right now, you're right, Louis, this is a Band-Aid to get the bear dens to a point that it's safe so that people can start using it again. And then that next phase is what we're going to look at after that. But I do agree that there is a lot that needs to be done. But the project that Amy's currently working on, the scope of that project is really about the repairs and the fixes that need to happen. But what we are hoping is that through this process, you know, we're happy to listen to ideas. We're happy to have people share those with us. And then we're also hoping that, again, once this is safe, we're hoping that it will be programmed and we can start to learn how this space can be better used so that when we do that design, we have a lot better understanding. So sorry, Amy, to jump in. I'll pass it back off to you.
No, I appreciate that. I think, Peter, are you next? Let's see if we can.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, thank you all for the presentation. I very much appreciate it. Lauren kind of answered a few of the questions, sort of, but I wanted to just kind of get more clarification on the 700,000. This is for basically cleanup, maintenance to make it walkable and safe again. Is that the idea? And if so, I guess maybe this is sort of what Louis was talking about a little bit, but I was, you know, is that the best use of $700,000, or do we want to have a plan in place to say, you know, this is what we're headed toward? And it might be, maybe I'm wrong, but I know that it sounds like we want to preserve a lot of the existing historical infrastructure there, which is great. But if there's a different use that's a better use of the facility, I would hate to see, you know, some significant changes made and alterations made that send us in a different direction, if that makes any sense at all. So I don't know, you know, just planning a bigger strategy around this, and I'm sure you are. I just wanted to get a little clarification on that. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, and I think kind of going back to the idea that that those bigger ideas will be kind of a future discussion, and it's realistically probably you know, we'll say at least 5 years out. So in the meantime, we just have to sort of do these safety improvements, you know, and I think nothing that we're doing now will preclude those future big ideas from happening. Like, for example, while we're talking about those pools, you know, something that's a temporary fill, if it's either wood deck or, you know, gravel or other material, you know, something that could be removed. And, you know, I get the comment that, yeah, maybe that, is it worth spending that money on doing those short-term temporary type improvements? But I think the condition that it's in now just isn't safe. So, you know, it's not something that we feel that we can leave it as is, as it's coming into our, you know, care and custody. So that's sort of the thinking behind that. I know Louis commented that maybe those other projects happening at the park wouldn't really impact the way the bear dens get used, but I think we'd like to see some of those play out and not sort of prematurely, you know, decide what is going to happen in the bear dens until we have a sense of, you know, what other maybe amenities are added elsewhere, or what, you know, different, I don't know, bigger moves are happening. So I think that's, hopefully that answers the question. I think next is Ricky.
Me, if I could jump in just really quickly to answer one
Sure.
more thing that Peter was commenting on. In terms of items that, you know, we don't want to take anything out that could be used as part of a future design, completely agree. And I think that's one of the things that Kyle is really sensitive to, and he's done a lot of work for Boston Parks in our historic parks, is really paying attention to those items. And part of what we'll also do is work with Landmarks Commission. So it may be that if panels of fencing need to come out because they are unsafe at the moment, you know, they get stockpiled to be able to, you know, be reused or things like that. So what we're looking at is anything that $700,000 is going to is not something that's then going to be ripped up. It's something that would need to happen as part of any future renovation as well. So like Kyle was saying, we're not going to do anything that's going to preclude a certain design. And then that 700,000 is actually just something that then would not be spent the next time because we've already done that basic infrastructure kind of work. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
And I think because this question just came up in the chat, but we'll also try to go through the chat questions in more detail. But I do want to just say that the funding for this project is from Parks Capital, not from the trust. So just to clarify that. Okay, it looks like Ricky, are you unmuted now?
Yeah, am I?
Yeah.
Yeah. At Franklin Park Coalition, and also personally, I walk up there just about every day, and it is and has been an eyesore for a very long time. And we have been going back and forth with parks to try to get something done there. So I think that the job that you guys have done so far in terms of identifying all these safety issues is something. It's not everything we want, but it's something. It's a step in the right direction. And I would be happy to see some of these repairs done, even just something as simple as walking up the stairs without invasives popping out and the stairs trying to fall in. The other thing I thought about is when I walk around the back of on the Seaver Street side, there's a huge drop right into Seaver Street, and they have some yellow caution tape there now. I think there should be some fencing there to keep people from falling over there. Also, some of the metal caps today with the high tech, they can replicate that probably in plastic or some other material that may end up being less expensive. But other than that, I think, you know, what we're trying to do is something in the right direction. And we have been going back and forth about getting these bear dens done. If anybody's ever listened to me, I talk about the Overlook all the time, anyone who'll listen. So we've been pushing for these two particular projects that affect our community that have been left to in ruins for 50 years, as Louis said. And so to have something done rather than nothing, I would go forward with the something.
Great. Thanks, Ricky. All right. Looks like C. Saliga, if I'm saying that right.
Kaliga is good enough. Everyone calls me that. I go by one name usually. A lot of us here do a lot. I think most of the people attending do a lot of community work. I was in another meeting and I came to this one late. And what came up at that meeting, we were talking about Franklin Park, and somebody said, I say they're carving up Franklin Park. And another person said they're gobbling up Franklin Park to do a lot of things. Of course, we should address safety. And by today's standards, that amount of money, they probably need more, but that isn't a lot of money to spend on all those things that you guys were outlining when I joined the meeting. But having been an activist most of my life, and I'm in my late 60s, I would say this, and I will say this at many different things. When it comes time to decide what to do with the space after the safety is done, and I think that Peter and Louis touched on this, but I think it's time for the city to take another approach. I don't think anymore, if we're going to be progressive, should the city come with a proposal and then community members vote on, is this going to be the use? I think community members need to be at the table to formulate that proposal. And when it comes time for people to say what's going to be done with this area, whether it is a performance space or is a restaurant or is anything, then community members should be at the table for any future proposals, especially with Franklin Park. Franklin Park is important to so many communities that surround Franklin Park and touches so many lives. And we can start here with Franklin Park. As the city takes over ownership, we have to be at the table to decide what's happening with our park. I think it's very important that that happen. I've been to too many things where the city comes and just says, these are the ideas that we came up with, now you can vote on them. No, they should be our ideas. And then we can vote on them. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
that's.
Go ahead, Amy, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I certainly, I think that's the goal, is that for any programming and, ideas for how the space gets used, that's coming from the community. But Lauren, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that's exactly what the plan is for that next phase, is to have the community help us program that, which is why we're doing the safety now, because that way we're not trying to do both of those at the same time. We're trying to address the safety so that we can actually start using it as soon as we have that ownership again. And then that's exactly what the hope is. And I know that, typically our projects, what we do, just so that you guys know, typically our first meeting, we come in when it's a design or a programming project, and we don't come in with any ideas. We come in and we say, this is what we see. This is the analysis of the space. Tell us what you guys want. And that's how that next phase is going to work. And one of the things that, people feel free to email me or feel free to email Amy. Typically, a lot of that collaboration is, we'll do in-person pop-ups. We'll have people go out in charrettes with images. People can sticker and vote on things that they like. They can tell us ideas. So if you guys have ideas that you think would be a really great community interaction for how that process can work, we'd love to hear that now, so that as we're planning that process, it feels genuine to the community. So we're happy to hear those ideas, because that's exactly what we want, because it really is the user's park, right? And we want everybody to feel a part of that. So.
Okay, Meredith.
Kyle, there was a question, Kyle, if we could stop sharing the screen, because everyone would like to be able to see each other a little more. Thanks, Kyle.
Hi, thanks so much for the opportunity to be a part of this. Appreciate all the work that went into organizing this. I just wondered if we're talking about safety, that we haven't had any discussion around lighting. Particularly if we want to make this a space that potentially could be used in different times of the day. And because it is tucked away a little bit there off that pathway, Is there some discussion around that, and also about signage? Because again, unless you are really walking in the park frequently, it's easy to miss it. Kind of tucked away, at least currently, with the trees the way they are. So could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, on the lighting question, I think that is certainly something that is envisioned for the park in general. At this particular site, it would really have to be part of that second phase, that longer term improvement to the site, given the cost associated with that. And I think signage is also part of that kind of larger idea, but I know there's some interest in interpretive signage that kind of explains some of the history that was shown in the slide. So I think it'll sort of come down to, in this project, really accomplishing those goals of making the project or making the site safe. And then if there is, you know, I guess I wouldn't want to say that we would be able to do signage as part of that, but because I know there are a lot of safety issues. So I think that's certainly great, you know, great ideas that are on our radar, but they may be, unfortunately, have to be postponed until the second phase of work for the project.
And just to add to that if we're trying to explore in this upcoming period about potential ways that the space could be re-envisioned, having all the cages back, or largely back into place, it just psychologically doesn't open up the space. You know, you feel like you're coming into a very small space where pedestrians can stand. There's a lot of ground there, but so I'm just curious about the commitment to completely rebuilding all the grill work and everything, as opposed to, you know, retaining some of it from a historical perspective, but then also making the space more versatile moving forward, as opposed to fencing off the sections. So just some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. And Amy, I just want to make sure that I let you know there was a question for you and Kyle. Someone wanted to know if you could help them understand why removing the trees is necessary. And so, Amy, if you could jump in on that, that would be great.
Yeah, those 5 that are shown on the plan in yellow, I don't know if it's worth revisiting that slide, but those are 5 that are in really bad shape. So they've been reviewed both by an arborist working with Kyle and then our parks arborist, and confirmed that they're essentially dead. And they're going to be removed in the very near future because of potential hazards with their condition. So that's something that, it's not that we want to remove them for the project, but they're just in such bad shape. I think that was the other trees that are shown on the plan are, there's some invasives identified. I think some invasive saplings that are growing sort of out of the wall. So those we'll still be looking into a little bit more around which are, you know, I guess worth saving in that case. But is that?
Yeah, and then Kyle, the second part of the question maybe is for you, is are we planning on planting any additional plants in their place? Because in addition to general environmental concerns, you know, that helps with noise pollution, shielding noises from neighborhoods, from the neighboring streets. So if you could comment on that. Well,
I mean, exactly what gets in the project we have to do a cost estimate first. So we're a little far off from knowing exactly what of all the things that we talked about in our observations and recommendations will get in the project. Obviously, we're going to prioritize the safety issues first. Now, if there was money available to plant trees, then that's something we could talk about. And I'm seeing that someone's offering to give tree saplings. So so that's something that we'll have to look at. And I think the next meeting we'd be able to talk about budget and what can be prioritized.
Actually, one thing I want to add to is I think the discussion around, like, if we add trees, you know, there are those openings where I think were historically planted there, but that's something that I wouldn't want to preclude, you know, our future ideas for the space. So because at that point we wouldn't want to have to, or wouldn't be able to maybe take out trees that we've planted. So I think part of that goal is to also, at least on the interior kind of areas, not add plants or not add trees that, you know, could be in conflict with a future programmatic use. Hi, Dorothy, did you have a comment?
I do. So it's about the tree removals. I understand that a lot of trees up there are in rough shape. And one thing I noticed, and Lewis mentioned this as well, I see it, is that things are cut and then left, and then you come back and you deal with it. And I'm wondering that there are so much trees that need to be shredded into mulch. Is there any plan to use that mulch as part of sort of like a understory cover at all? Or is it all hauled out? Because I look at the work at the Arboretum, and it seems like they just do a lot of the mulching on site. And I'm wondering if this is a resource, if we're not using it, it could help with, I mean, I wouldn't want to fill one of the 6-foot pools with it, but if there's sort of like a temporary ground cover that will just biodegrade eventually, and also does add to beautification of the space. And that's like throughout the park, I noticed that, but it could be something that could be used here.
Lauren, do you know if they ever mulch?
So we do
trees?
have, we do have mulchers in the yard, and sometimes that does happen. I'm not sure specifically about what Lewis was asking about or talking about with the branches being stacked places. But I do know, Dorothy, that sometimes when large trees do come down, sometimes they're left in sight because of habitat for wildlife. And I know that Jack is on. I'm going to call on Jack. I know Jack from the Emerald Necklace Conservancy is on, and he does a lot of work with the trees. And I'm not sure if, Jack, if you want to comment on that in terms of practices, or if you'd be willing to. Can Jack unmute himself, or is he able to?
Hi, yeah, thanks for letting me unmute.
Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what pals are talking about, Dorothy, but also hi everyone, I'm Jack, I work with the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. But sometimes when larger trees are down, I know they're left for habitat, as Lauren was saying, but it is an interesting question of whether or not we could just have like a chipper come in and handle more of the random branches that are left in areas. And when I say we, that might be, you know, Max, the city's arborist, or someone else.
Yeah,
So
and there
that's
is a chipper at the
conversation.
yard. Yeah.
Right.
I just want to make sure I was remembering correctly about the habitat, because that was what I had understood about sometimes why large trunks are still left as well.
That's true, although that seems to have like changed a little bit with different
Okay.
administrations. So I don't know
Okay.
what the whole city standard is there.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks, Jack.
All right, Lewis.
Yes, thank you. And I was trying to let folks go through rotation because we have quite a few people participating. But the issue of the trees is basically part of the discussion I began earlier. It's been such poor maintenance of the park. I mean, really poor, even with the agreement of the city to do contract work on behalf of the zoo, that many trees, old trees fell. Trees that should have been taken down, you know, were cut and left. And so you don't have what is an urban wild or a place that really makes sense in terms of folks who use it. The front, as you all know, of the bear dens is one of the routes for the cross-country track team and for the half marathon people and everyone else, there are some things there that are dangerous. Up against the wall, there's maybe 2 or 3 trees that have fallen and have been left there. The city has cut branches and left them there. That doesn't serve the environmental benefit for habitat. It basically creates a very dangerous circumstance. The drop on Seaver Street is not as dangerous if people can see it, but the invasive growth has been growing. Very little maintenance has been done. So my statement is basically to say, if we're planning anything, there needs to be a well laid out, I'd say comprehensive, but that might be scary, a well laid out maintenance plan for the use of the road, for the use of the space, whether it's the interior space, that has to be there, else it's all for naught. The safety issues are that of lighting, the safety issues of that of, getting up and down the road, which is a steep grade, or getting up the stairs, which are crumbling in certain places. They make sense, but they only make sense in the context that there's some real value put into the overall use of the space by the people who live here. The other piece for me is that if they cut the invasive growth, I and my other neighbors, and I literally live right across the street from the big bear cage, we can help, as we did for the last 30, 40 years, with graffiti and all the other challenges that take place. The invasive growth goes up, they don't do anything about it, and you don't get to see anything. Some of the things that have been problematic, they begin to deteriorate the wall around the park if they're not handled properly. So these things have to be taken into consideration in your planning and in your evaluation of what you're proposing to do. But I'm hopeful that what we do is comprehensive to the extent safety, in terms of lighting, in terms of access, and in terms of making sure people know the boundaries of the space they're using is in play.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate you giving a little bit more context on those trees, because one of the things that we were talking about just today actually is that we have a few more staff members in our tree division, and several of them have been working in Franklin Park over the last week or so. So knowing that, we can make sure that we talk to our tree warden about specifically those concerns, and then hopefully Amy can maybe give you guys an update on some of those trees and what would happen with those at the next meeting.
So I am trying to go through the chat because there are quite a few comments starting back at the beginning. So I think there were some questions about providing feedback on these current, modifications or safety improvements without really knowing, what the program will be. I think it's maybe best to think of it as how could a flexible space be used, or what would give us the most flexibility? Because like we've said, it's something that we hope people will come up with ideas for activating the space or having events, but it's as creative as people want to get with that. So I know that's a little bit hard to maybe determine how you want to see the improvements carried out, but I think the greatest flexibility is probably our best approach, just to not preclude these ideas that we hope to hear from community members.
There's a question of who owns the land now, and it is the state. It was transferred with the zoo years ago. The same with Peabody Circle, and both of those are properties that we're working on getting back into the City of Boston collection.
And then let's see, I think Dorothy had a question about when does this work start. So the goal is for construction to start this summer, and that is pending that transfer of ownership. But I think we're optimistic, and we think that will happen.
Question about when the next Franklin Park Action Plan meeting is. And there are no other specific Franklin Park Action Plan meetings. The action plan process is over and that plan was released. That's then a planning document for all of these other projects. So there's not going to be any specific action plan meetings, but there are going to be meetings like this one or the overlook or other things that come out of that plan that we will be having meetings about, but they are not going to be specific to the action plan. More about how that's being implemented through the projects we're meeting about.
Also, I did want to point out that I think Jack posted early on that in the chat that there are volunteer opportunities with the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. So there's a link there. We appreciate what they do for the on the maintenance side. Okay, sorry, there's a lot of chats.
And Amy, we can always go back and review all the chats later. And if we missed anything, we can reach out to individuals.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
Right. That makes sense. Lauren, I guess on the lighting question, in terms of what's in the action plan, I know there were some recommendations there, and people have added in the chat some comments about wildlife. Is that something that came up in those conversations?
It did. There's always concern with dark sky, with wildlife. And so all of that has to be balanced. One of the things that we're looking at is looking at sort of an overall lighting study. We also have talked about an overall signage study. So that obviously the signage that we talked about, project specific, but also looking at it as a whole, because we definitely need a lot of wayfinding out there in addition to individual elements like Amy was talking about. So yeah, those things did come up, Amy, and that's why it's not quite as easy as a quick answer, as there's a lot of things that play into that.
Jack, did you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I figured I'd just take this moment to plug what we're doing a tiny bit more, because it seems like we have a really interested group of folks here that are caring about wildlife and trees and things like that. So if anyone's interested in volunteering, throughout the spring, summer, and fall, the Emerald Necklace Conservancy hosts really regular groups all around the Emerald Necklace, but Franklin Park in particular. And then we're also working on our tree care. We're planning to be inventorying and then hopefully down the road planning within the next year, essentially from now, a bunch of trees in Franklin Park. We're doing those in winter of the following year. So we have a lot slated that I'm excited about. And one other more presentation specific thought that I had is that, Kyle, I thought the idea of closing cage 4 is interesting, because I've seen that one has a lot of just topographical and other challenges. My only concern with that is that sometimes when fences are put up to keep people out, they can also keep maintenance out. And if trash and whatnot gets in there, we might have a bit of a headache with that. So it's just a small point. But thanks, everyone.
Yeah, Jack, that's a good point. There would always be a gate so that you could get in there to do that kind of maintenance.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, and I think also, because I believe there was a question about White Stadium, so if anyone's not familiar with that project, there is a meeting for that next week, and the website is, I can put in the chat, is just boston.gov/white-stadium. So I think for anyone who wants to hear more about that project, certainly go to that webpage. You can get updates and then find out meeting information. So I think with that, we will wrap this up, but I really appreciate everyone joining us, and I'll email everyone who's attended tonight and certainly give you the link to the meeting recording and the meeting slides, and we'll keep you posted on the next meeting that's planned. Oh yeah, thanks Lauren for putting that link in. And again, just thank you for spending the time with us and giving your input. Really appreciate it.